The sketch stage is so crucial to the entire illustration process. And it's at once intimidating because there's kind of limitless options for what you can draw, what you can create. But it's also kind of liberating because it's where you're allowed to be kind of messy and sloppy and not really worry too much about the final product. So what I like to do when I get a commission, and in this case, a job for the Washington Post where I was asked to do a portrait of Stanley Tucci. So the way I usually begin is I'll read the article if one is provided, and if one is not provided, then I will write down a lot of words. I'll do a little research in terms of just, reading what, in this case, Stanley Tucci is about, what he does, his career, why this article is being written, and in this case it's because he has a book coming out. And I'll just do a bunch of writing of words, very loose line work, and like I said, it's sketchy and messy, and that theme kind of carries out throughout my whole process. So even right here where you see that I'm drawing the illustration on illustration board, this is loose, and then I will end up tightening it up, and then I'll end up painting it. But every stage of it is considered under construction, and I try to think of things that way so that as I'm working, it doesn't become too daunting of a task. So some of the things that I knew should go into this image were aspects of Stan Tucci's travel show on CNN. And that meant including aspects of Italy because I think all of it is just traveling around Italy, at least the ones I've seen. But there's a lot of Italian influence, there's a lot of influence on the food, on the architecture, on the people. So I wanted this scene to feel that way in this iteration. Some of the other sketches I showed were touching upon his home life and also just his travel life in general. So I had another idea where he was sitting on an airplane, and then I had another idea where he was just kind of using his pizza oven in the backyard. And when you send ideas over to an art director, essentially what they do is they kind of show the ideas to the rest of their team and they get to pick for you. So this thankfully was an idea that I was most fond of, and so I was kind of rooting for them to pick this one, and I lucked out and they did. So what you're looking at right now is the drawing that will ultimately become the painting, and this is done on illustration board. And when I'm drawing things out at first, I like to work in color pencil, something a little bit lighter at first. In this case, it's earth green, and then I like to work a darker color over top to just kind of solidify the line work. So this is me using indigo over top of that earth green. Doing a little bit of erasing as I go to kind of clean up the edges. And part of the reason I work with these colors and do the shading and all of that is because I like the drawing to show through towards the end, but it also helps me to have a nice transition from the drawing into the painting. I try to not think of this as a coloring book necessarily, but it can get that way if you don't shade. This is workable fixative, which I spray over top of the drawing. You let it dry for about 10 minutes and then it kind of seals things in place. I'm spraying that in the garage at my studio, which is outdoors. So if you ever use that stuff, make sure you use it in a well-ventilated or just outdoor space. Now as I lay out my palette, I put out the primary colors and white. I also like using a tube of gray and I like using a tube of phthalo blue and cobalt blue. Now, as I mix my first color, what I'm really thinking of is a theme color to sort of bind everything together. So, I know that the sky in reality might be a lot bluer than this, but I like the idea of having kind of a greener undertone, kind of a sage undertone to everything. So I'm covering the entire illustration board with that color as a means of binding everything together. And now I'm going into the sky, making the paint nice and thick. And as you'll notice, I should say, one of the things you can tell is I have a lot of paint on the brush, so that means I can kind of move around without going back to the palette. And I like doing that, especially at first, to just kind of get very broad strokes in there. I like when the paint is visible. I like when the brush strokes are visible. So loading up the brush kind of ensures that it's going to have that feel to things. Before I even began painting this, I did map out the colors to a certain extent. Not every single detail, but I did know that I wanted things to have kind of a green and orange and violet feel. So a lot of the colors that I'm laying down, they're not going to just exist in that area. They're going to be spread around kind of a lot. So the orange, the yellow in the background here, that will get utilized in other places, possibly into the noodles, possibly on the Vespa, possibly in some of the flesh tone colors as well. But I also, as I was painting, kind of realized that I wanted the sun to put out a very warmer light. So there are some pinks that are getting involved, and some kind of bluer silver colors. Especially onto the ground, onto the cobblestone road there. So there's kind of a lot of colors going on, but everything is very much derived from that palette that I first mentioned, where I'm going for kind of green and orange and a muted violet pink, let's say. Now, as I move away from those grayish and sort of pink colors, I'm adding the green into these plants in the foreground here. And you can see what my palette looks like with all the colors mixed together. But again, that green will appear in other places, as will some of these other colors, like this darker purple here, which was the genesis of this very dark color that you'll see in the suit here. And that same color will go into parts of the face, parts of the tines of the fork, parts of the rims of the glasses. So the colors that I mix, they almost look like a Venn diagram on the palette. They really lend themselves to the creation of another color, and that's one way I attempt to make all of the colors really mesh and feel cohesive. So as I work myself towards colors that are a little thicker, I also work towards very bright colors. So this orange initially feels way too bright, but I also know that acrylic tends to dry a little darker and a little bit duller, a little madder. So as I'm laying the paint down, I'm trying to just kind of trust the process that things will blend together and not feel too aggressive. as it dries. And if it needs to be pumped up even more when it dries, then I can always go back in and adjust that. That's one of the nice things about acrylic paint. It dries quickly, and if you screw up a little, you can always go back over it and you don't really have to wait too long. Okay, now I'm finally getting into the face. Using the Bob Ross technique, a little bit of going background to foreground. So when you work that way, it means that you don't have to necessarily make lines that are in the background kind of stop right at the figure. Everything can kind of continue through, and then you can paint over top of that, so the overlap doesn't feel as uncomfortable. So we're getting to the nitty-gritty here, getting some details on the noodles. I like the Tuscan scenery in the background there. Another way that I think broad to specific as I'm painting is I'll start with larger brushes, sometimes even larger brushes than I'm comfortable with, and then work my way towards smaller brushes, which maybe it's just a mental thing. It just kind of helps me to not think about detail too soon. So we're putting final touches on here, putting some on the fingernails, some details on the tips of the fingers. Some final marks on the portrait there as well. Sometimes what I do at the very end, even though I'm signing it right now to mark it finished, is I'll just take a few minutes and look at things from further away and really assess whether I'm done, whether I need to work on any small or large detail. And if not, then it's pretty much a wrap. So here it is in its final form. Thanks for tuning in.